There's been a long quest to make keyboard-based synths more expressive, especially over the past few decades. First, there were wheels, pedals, levers. Finally, they added touch strips, breath controller inputs, and even keyboard aftertouch. However, more recently, manufacturers started coming out with MPE instruments. These are MIDI polyphonic expression instruments, some of the most popular of which include the Rolly C-board, Roger Lynn's Linstrument, and KMI's K-board. Now we have an entirely new option in the form of Osmose, which came from the French company Expressive back in 2021. There are a couple of different things that separate the Osmose from its MPE competitors. Number one, it has what might appear at first sight to be a conventional keyboard action with full-size black and white keys. This is different than the C-board's squishy, continuous silicone rubber surface and the Linstrument, which has these sort of fret-like squares. Of course, as we'll see, it's pretty far from what you'd consider a conventional keyboard. However, it's also relatively more expensive than any other MPE I've seen thus far. The second thing worth noting is that it has a built-in synth engine, which gives us a complete standalone expressive synth that doesn't rely on compatibility with other soft synths or running on an attached computer. As a result, we have an integration between sound and touch that is much more cohesive, and to me, it's more intimate and easier to use. Of course, you can still get control of software and hardware synths via USB or MIDI, though we'll get more into that in a future video. In this video, I want to explore the ins and outs of the Osmose, some of my personal pros and cons after playing around with it for about a week, and explore what makes it so unique overall. It's also worth noting that Expressive did send this to us for a review, though they aren't paying us to review this, so it is completely subjective. Before we dive in and take a deeper look at the Osmose, I urge you to subscribe to Integratio for more synth exploration videos just like this one. While the design of the keys on the Osmose might give you the impression that it is your basic synthesizer or keyboard, it's actually far from it. Now, from the moment you put your hands down on the keys, you'll realize that it neither plays nor sounds like your average synth. On your standard synthesizer, whether it's a Juno or a Prophet or a Minimoog, the only thing that it's going to detect will be the velocity. Once you play a key, a patch you've dialed in will decide how to move forward. The Osmose, on the other hand, works by continuously detecting multiple variables, doing away with the old school concept of key velocity, and instead derives note onset information from the attack trajectory and left-right movement. As for the sounds, you can get a range of different tones and timbres, including those you might expect from your average synthesizer, to more organic, acoustic-style sounds, to more experimental textures and tones that are far outside of the realm of your traditional synth. Up to this point, it's one of the most unique styles of expressive control that I've personally ever seen from a synth with piano-style keys like this one. The integrated synth engine, known as the Hagen Continuum Egan Matrix, also happens to be one of the most powerful and complex on the market today. In fact, complex is a bit of an understatement. Luckily, to play the internal sounds, you don't need to connect your synth to a computer or use the Egan Matrix at all. There are over 500 factory presets to play around with, all of which are quite diverse. Alongside that, you can save any tweaked presets to one of the 128 user memory slots. The external MIDI mode also exists, and with a dedicated button, you can toggle the Osmose's interface entirely over to MIDI control functionality that ignores the internal engine altogether. In a future video, I'll explore the handful of dedicated MIDI control profiles which are provided, including full MPE implementation, the classic keyboard profile, which turns off all expressive features except velocity and channel aftertouch, and the Poly Aftertouch profile, which gives good compatibility with synths like the Oberheim OB6 that offer this kind of response, but not full MPE. Overall, the Osmose is a pretty hefty piece of gear. It weighs in at around 18 pounds or just over 8 kilograms altogether. The top panel is made out of a metal material, while the base and sides are made out of a tough plastic. On the top, you'll find a number of physical controls and a high-resolution color LED screen that offers pretty decent visibility and contrast no matter what angle you're looking at it from. The buttons up here include a dedicated preset up-down recall, which allows you to switch between presets. As you can hear, the audio does cut out as you move from one preset to the next. And then we also have an octave transposition button, which moves up 2 octaves in either direction. Let's test that out. You'll also find dual fader-like controls, one of which is sprung and one of which isn't. These are for pitch bend and modulation, as you'd expect. The design is much different than what you'd find on a traditional synth, however, though they do act the same. It's worth noting that I really like the way this pitch fader bounces back into place. The action is really nice on it. Moving up to the buttons and encoders around the screen, it's also worth noting that none of these have dedicated functions. Instead, they relate to what's visible on the screen next to them. The buttons above the screen can be used to select different menus, while the buttons here on the end let you switch between the internal sound engine and any external devices. I do really like the way that the encoders feel, though for the price I was maybe expecting them to be a bit easier to move. They do get a little bit stuck and are a little bit harder to turn than you would judge from their size. I've also noticed that there is a slight bit of a lag on the screen when you're playing with the encoders, and I'm hoping that this is something Expressive addresses with a future firmware update. On the rear panel, you'll find a stereo pair of 1/4-inch pseudo-balanced TRS line outputs, 2 1/4-inch pedal inputs, a USB socket, DIN MIDI in and out, and an inlet for the supplied 12-volt 1.5A center positive external PSU. Like many expensive pieces of hardware these days, it does lock in with a 1/4 turn, which is really nice. And on the front, you'll find a stereo 1/4-inch headphone output with a sprung retractable volume knob, which I think is a really, really nice, classy touch. The main focus, however, is on the keys, which do feel incredible. I noticed that they sit right on the cusp of semi-weighted and fully weighted. Of course, you don't get the same hard stop that you would from a traditional keyboard, so if you're a keyboard player or a pianist, it might take a second to get used to. I've also noticed that there's sort of a matte feel to these keys. I'm guessing they're designed that way so that when you are using the bend functionality, which I'll get to in a second, that your fingers don't slide around as much. However, I've also noticed that it makes it feel quite unusual to move around the keyboard quickly. Of course, one of the most important characteristics of the Osmose, and the thing that sets it apart from all other synths, is the way that the keyboard works. Now, both the black and white keys on this synth are pressure sensitive, meaning that they derive velocity data or MPE strike value from the initial key touch and various types of channel or polyphonic pressure from the aftertouch. You could essentially start out with a very light touch, and as you continue pressing down, the sound itself could change and evolve over time depending on the internal programming. What's even more important to note is that this pressure control is polyphonic, meaning that each finger on each key can be applying a different amount of pressure, essentially triggering different envelopes at once for a more dynamic sound overall. It's a very humanistic style of playing, in my opinion. Once you reach a certain point in the keystroke, which is about 9 millimeters to the first point of resistance, the aftertouch initiates, and this moves the patch in a completely different direction from where you started. The black keys, on the other hand, give us about 4 to 5 millimeters until you reach that aftertouch. Now, of course, there are several synths out there these days with keyboard aftertouch, including the Dave Smith Instruments Evolver or the Korg Kronos, though they are a bit limited in some aspects. The shallow travel distance for aftertouch is a huge limitation for those keyboards. And here you get a much larger threshold, meaning more control overall. Of course, you also get the added dimension of left to right control, which is built into this synth. This left to right control is available on every key. For example, you can use this for pitch bend, which can adjust the pitch bend up or down as you move from left to right. The one important thing to note is that you do have to apply a significant amount of pressure to use this special multi-dimensional left to right pitch bend. With the black keys, you could technically come in from the side and wiggle it a little bit to get that pitch bend, though it's not going to be the most player-friendly way to approach the keyboard. In terms of actually playing the Osmose, I think it's best approached with an incredibly light touch. You will have to work a lot on your technique, especially if you're used to playing regular keyboards. Now, I'm not the best keyboard player in the world, but I have found that when I do play complex chords on this thing, I have a bit of a habit of pulling the notes from side to side, which can pull some of the notes out of tune. So as you can see, it is very easy to make this thing sound absolutely terrible. And if you're not a professional keyboardist or an experienced keyboardist, I think it's best to stick to monophonic lines or lower the pressure sensitivity on the menu so that it's not as sensitive. If we come back over here to the left, you'll notice that there's a number of parameters or macros that you can use to control the overall characteristics of the synth. If we go up here to this top knob, we can see that we are on the synth menu, and we can move that from right to left and explore the different macros for this particular preset, some global effects, the master EQ right here, some compression, gain controls, as well as a voice and mod pedal adjustment menu. Let's see how these macros sound on some of the built-in presets. Now, after about a week of playing and using the Osmose, there are a few thoughts that I have. One of the first things that I like about this synth is the MPE-like expressivity that you get with the keys. The onboard synth sounds are also beautifully integrated with touch, and it's probably one of the primary aspects of this synth and why so many people like it. If you are a pianist and you're used to the black and white style key bed, you're just getting an extra level of expressivity that you wouldn't get otherwise, and it's so much fun to play around with. I wish I could explain it more in this video, but I honestly think it's one of those things that you just have to try out for yourself and see how it feels. Now, of course, there will be times when you'll want more uniformity between the notes that you're playing, like you would get on a regular keyboard, and there is a MIDI mode for that built into here. And those times might include making, house-style bass lines or crispy EDM leads. But if you do find yourself playing around with sounds that could benefit from that extra level of expressivity, then this is one of the best options I can think of on the market today. One of the other main pros of this synth is the ultra powerful Haken Audio Egan Matrix. Now, in this software, which is included with Osmose, you get access to a number of different types of synthesis, including physical modeling, additive, subtractive, FM, ring mod, and granular. Because this is a simple overview video of the Osmose, I didn't want to get too deep into the Egan Matrix, although I will discuss its capabilities and go through the interface in a future video, so make sure to subscribe to Integratio to see that coming up. One of my other pros is that the Osmose is a very capable MPE MIDI controller. There are tons of ways to integrate this, whether you want to use it to control your average synthesizer or other hardware and software MPE synthesizers. It's ready to go right out of the box. Lastly, I do love the build quality. The synth feels very sturdy, very sleek, very classy. It does have a friendly interface as well. The LED screen looks great. The colors on the LED screen look great, and it just makes it much more fun to use as a sort of future-oriented synthesizer. Of course, the integrated software is also excellent. It feels very stable. It feels very easy to get into, especially for people that aren't synthesizer experts by any means. Now that you know the pros, I want to get into the cons of the Osmose so far. One of the first ones is, though I do really enjoy the overall design of the Osmose, the fact that the keys come up off of the keyboard is a little bit strange, and I've noticed that it has already started to collect a little bit of dust on the inside. Over time, this could maybe be a bit of a problem, but only time will tell. The other thing I've noticed is that because of the way the keys move from left to right, they do have the issue of clashing into the adjacent keys, which again, over time could lead to chipping or breakage. I'm hoping that's not the case, but again, we'll just have to see. One of the other cons is that the Egan matrix, while powerful, is nothing short of complex. The designers clearly made this to be feature-rich and ultra-powerful, but I don't think they took into consideration how a synth should be user-friendly to patch. Alright, before we conclude this video, I do want to play through some of my favorite patches that I've discovered thus far to give you a better idea of how the Osmose sounds in action. All right, and there you have it, my overview of the Osmose from Expressive E. I think what Expressive E has achieved with this synthesizer is truly amazing, and to me it's one of the most exciting synthesizers or electronic instruments that I've ever gotten my hands on. I'm excited to see what the future holds in store in terms of firmware updates, and to see if there will be any more patch updates from communities online. We're going to be releasing another video soon that will take a deeper dive into the synth engine and everything that's involved with the Osmose, so make sure to subscribe to Integratio if you want to see that. I'm Tyler Conahan. Until next time.